Welcome to the Folklore Hearth. Tonight, we gather around the fire to delve into the rich tapestry of Norwegian folktales. We'll wander through the lands of the boy who went to the north wind, and perhaps even find our way to Soria Moria Castle. If these gentle stories captivate or soothe you, consider tapping subscribe or like, but only if it truly feels right for you. I love hearing where you're joining us from and what time your clock reads as you listen in. It's a comforting reminder of the quiet moments we share, no matter the distance. Now, as you settle in, perhaps dim the lights or slip beneath the covers. Let the world around you fade softly into the background, with the fire crackling beside us. Let us begin with the tale of a clever boy and the north wind's whimsy. Once upon a time, in a quiet corner of Norway, where the air was crisp and the sky a soft, washed blue, there lived a boy and his mother in a small cottage. The little house sat under a roof gone green with moss, tucked among rolling hills and tall pines that leaned and swayed with the wind. Smoke rose steadily from the stone chimney, and with it drifted the warm, earthy smell of burning peat, threaded through with the salt of distant sea mist. Life in that little home was simple, and it was warm. The boy, bright-eyed and quick, went about his days to the crunch of forest leaves underfoot and the slow lapping of water somewhere just out of sight. He and his mother owned little, but what they had was enough to light their evenings the way a single lamp lights a frosted window. Then one day, as the boy came back from his errands in the village, the north wind came sweeping through, playful, restless, a little mischievous. It went whistling over the hills, teasing the pine boughs and rattling the thatch of the boy's roof. And it caught the door of their store cupboard at just the wrong moment. And with one high gust, it carried off the last of their flour. The very flour his mother had set aside to bake their evening bread. With the stubborn calm that belongs to the young, the boy made up his mind to go and find the north wind. If the wind had taken the flour, then surely the wind could put things right. He drew a breath of the cool, salt-touched air and set off along a path that wound easily through sun-dappled clearings, over small, chattering streams, and between slender rows of silver birch. The north wind's country lay far off, where the hills seemed to meet the sky, and the boy walked on steadily, his steps falling into rhythm with the birds in the branches overhead. Shafts of golden light crossed his way, and the breeze lifted his hair with an idle, friendly touch. After a while, he climbed a low hill, and at the top, he stopped. There, where the land gave way to open sky, he found the north wind itself, tall and turning, a great churning thing that stirred the clouds and sang without ever seeming to end. "North wind," the boy called, his voice soft but firm. "You swept away the last of our flour as I was coming home. Without it, my mother and I haven't so much as a crust between us. The north wind, old as the world and just as vast, listened, and somewhere in all its shifting, shimmering self, it understood that its careless game had brought real sorrow to a small house. "I am truly sorry, dear boy," it answered, in a voice that was at once a whisper and a gale. "To make it right, I will give you a gift." And with a slow swirl, it brought out a cloth that seemed woven from dusk and daybreak, both glowing like the sky at evening. "A magic cloth," the north wind said. "Whenever you tell it, cloth, lay a table. It will spread itself with the finest food there is, enough to fill you and your mother, and to spare." The boy took the cloth gratefully. It lay cool and soft over his fingers. He thanked the north wind and turned for home, the ground meeting each step with a gentle, dewy give. Along the way, he stopped to rest at an inn, its windows lit with a friendly glow. Inside, the air was heavy with the mellow smell of mulled wine and wood smoke, and the innkeeper welcomed him warmly enough. During his stay, the boy showed off the magic cloth, and the innkeeper, whose welcome sometimes hid a sharper purpose, watched with gleaming eyes. No sooner had the boy fallen asleep than the innkeeper quietly traded the wondrous cloth for a plain one, as dull and ordinary as any rag. Knowing nothing of the swap, the boy carried on home. But when he laid the cloth on the table and spoke the words, nothing happened at all. So back he went to the north wind, his resolve a little firmer now, tempered by what had gone wrong. "I see," said the north wind when it had heard him out. "Then I will give you another gift." This time, with a brisk, clean gust, it brought forward a ram, broad-shouldered and proud, its fleece shining with a soft, moonlit sheen. "Say to him, 'Ram, ram, make gold,' and he will bring you gold enough for every comfort you and your mother could want." The boy stroked the warm curl of the fleece and thanked the wind, and once more he set out for home through the long gold light of late afternoon. Again he stopped at the inn to rest, and again the innkeeper watched him with keen and greedy interest, and again the boy suspected nothing. While he slept, the innkeeper led the ram away and left an ordinary one in its place. Come morning, the boy went on, and found in time that he was walking, once again, back to the north wind. The third time he came wiser still, and told his story over, a note of patience in his young voice. "You have been wronged, dear boy," said the north wind, and the air around it smelled of pine resin and far-off seas. "So this time I will give you something no one can steal away so easily." And it held out a simple, sturdy stick. "This stick will do as you say. Only tell it, 'Stick, stick, lay on,' and it will stand up for you against anyone who has cheated you." Humble as the gift looked, the boy trusted it and thanked the north wind once more. steady now and full of gratitude for the tireless wind. The road back to the inn lay under a softening twilight, the sky washing itself in lavender and rose. The shadows stretched long across the path, but there was something sure in the boy's step now, a knowing that came of hard experience. At the inn he stayed the night again, and the pattern began as before. The innkeeper, meaning to help himself to even this plain little gift, crept up under cover of dark. But this time the boy woke and said, "Stick, stick, lay on." The stick sprang up quick and lively and politely but very firmly, set about the innkeeper until he was thoroughly sorry for himself. It was not a scene of anger so much as of fairness setting itself right. The innkeeper gave back the stolen treasures at once, ashamed of his own greed. The magic cloth, the wondrous ram, all returned to the boy they belonged to. With everything safe again, the boy went home to his mother and brought with him the cloth's endless feasts and the ram's golden plenty, just as the wind had promised. They say the cloth laid tables that gleamed, and the ram filled their days with gold, so that they never again went without food or warmth. In the snug corner of their cottage, through bright summers and long candle-lit winters, the boy and his mother found their joy in that simple abundance. Under the soft drum of rain on the thatch, in the light of the hearth, they lived contentedly, ever grateful to the north wind's kindness and to the brave heart that had gone looking for it. The boy and his mother settled into a renewed and easy peace within their little home. Each morning, the sun would peek shyly through the window, warming the pale colours of their plain, tidy room. A room now full of laughter and the smell of fresh bread, curling around them soft as the morning mist. The magic cloth lay folded on a wooden shelf, its fabric bright as thread spun from sunlight. Whenever they wished, it turned a simple meal into a feast, plates and platters appearing to please even a king. The two of them would sit at their sturdy table while the firelight danced on the walls, throwing playful shadows that seemed to share in their good cheer. The ram grazed contentedly on the slope beside the house and became as dear to them as any friend. Its fleece shone through the passing days, and now and then the boy would murmur the simple words that called up a quiet stream of gold, enough to meet their needs with ease and to allow the small comforts and little luxuries that brightened their lives. The seasons turned. Winter drew its hush over the world, and spring woke it again to green. Through all these turnings, the boy and his mother lived in harmony, visited often by the song of the north wind, which wound through the forest like a lullaby and carried faint stories from far-off lands. Sometimes they would sit together by the fire while the boy told again of his journey to the north wind's country. His mother listened with a heart full of pride, her eyes catching the flicker of the flames, warmed by the courage of a child who had set out into the world not for riches or glory, but for something as plain and as dear as a bag of flour. And so, with gifts beyond counting, they made their life anew. Each day a small treasure shared. The boy grew with every passing year, his spirit as bright and steady as on the morning he first turned his face toward the north wind. An echo of hope carried on the moving air. The innkeeper, humbled by the stick's plain lesson, mended his ways. He came to welcome travellers with honest hospitality, having learned at last that true fortune lies not in what we take from others, but in the goodwill we share. And as soft dawns gave way to star-scattered nights, the boy and his mother dwelt on in their little home, held in the quiet beauty of Norway's timeless hills. Together, they watched the days open like petals in the morning light, a gentle proof that fairness can be rewarded, and that kindness, and a boy with a steady heart, can carry a whole life into contentment. And there, on the quiet nights when the north wind sang its old melody through the trees, they would remember it all with a soft smile, a reminder of hope and laughter and the fairness that life can bring, gentle as a breeze across dew-speckled grass. So let this tale remind you too of warmth and kindness, glowing like fireflies on a summer's night. A lullaby wrapped in the comfort of a mother's arms, where dreams may carry you gently away into the quiet of the night. Good night. And so one story ends, and another begins. Let yourself sink a little deeper. There was once a poor farmer who lived in the Norwegian countryside, his home tucked under a wide and open sky. The land around him rolled in gentle rises and hollows, patched with the greens of field and the darker greens of forest. He had many children, each dear to him, but his youngest daughter was known for her gentle eyes and a curiosity that kept her heart reaching towards stories beyond their quiet valley. One evening, beneath a harvest moon that turned the fields to silver, the door of their cottage creaked open. In the doorway stood a great white bear, still and stately, as pale as the moon itself. The bear spoke in a low voice, deep as a far-off river, and offered the family wealth beyond measure if the farmer would let his youngest daughter go away with him to a home she need never leave unless she wished to. The farmer, moved by the promise of ease for all his children, looked to his daughter with a heavy heart. She answered softly, swayed less by silver and gold than by the bear's eyes, which were deep and full of mystery yet somehow kind. And so it was agreed. Wrapping herself in her best woolen shawl, she climbed onto the bear's broad back and felt the softness of his fur beneath her hands. As he carried her toward distant country, the cool night air seemed to promise unseen horizons, and the familiar smell of pine and peat smoke faded slowly behind them. They travelled through thickets and valleys, each stranger and finer than the last. The rustle of leaves and the low chirr of crickets went with them, a lullaby beneath the calm of the stars. When morning came, it brought a land washed gold with sunlight, meadows opening wide toward the horizon. In a place no map could name, the bear brought her to a castle glowing in the soft light of dawn. It was hewn from marble as pale as morning cloud, set among gardens full of new bloom. Within its old and quiet halls, hangings on the walls told stories out of other ages, and every corridor held a hush that seemed to keep long secrets. There, each night after the sun had set, the bear lay down, and in the still space between waking and sleep, he let go of his animal shape and became a man. Though the young woman never saw his face as they talked and shared soft words far into the night, she felt his kindness and his warmth. His nearness was a steady comfort, like the patient glow of a lamp left in a window through the deepest hours. But the old stories of far-off realms had left her curious, longing to understand more of the world, and to know the man who came only in the dark. One evening, trusting the light of a single candle, she turned to look upon her companion. As the light touched him, the enchantment broke like a fragile dream. In that brief pause between her caught breath and his waking, she saw no creature of the forest, but a gentle, noble prince. Her wonder was quickly clouded by the sorrow that crossed his face as he woke. "Now we must part," he said, his voice as soft as snow, settling into silence. A trust given too soon had cost him his freedom, and before she grasped the weight of it, he was carried away, bound to marry another in a castle east of the sun and west of the moon. The young woman, certain now of what she had lost, resolved to find him and set him free. She set out on foot, through lands that stretched on without end, drawing strength from the love that pulled her onward. The forests around her seemed old with quiet magic, their branches leaning close as if to steady her tired steps. Along the way, 3 wise women marked her passing, each stranger than the one before. To the first, a kind stranger dressed in cloth that shimmered like silver thread, who lived alone deep in the forest, she told her trouble. The woman gave her a golden apple, warm as a hearthstone, and sent her on. To the second, whose gentle wisdom drifted through her hidden glade like wood smoke, she spoke again of her quest, and received a golden carding comb, cool and familiar in her hands. And the third, in a cottage wrapped in fragrant honeysuckle, saw her determination and gave her a golden spinning wheel that hummed as it turned. These gifts, gathered in her arms, became her only company as she crossed strange and beautiful country. She climbed mountains whose peaks brushed the clouds, and by night walked softly under a single watchful moon, whose light smoothed the rocks beneath her feet. She passed through valleys where streams murmured among rust-colored stones, and winds moved low through the pines. At last, at the very edge of the world, she came upon the four winds, each older and more wistful than the last, forever circling the earth in their long dance of air and time. To them she told her tale, her voice rising and falling with the turning breeze. The west wind, her first listener, smiled and blew kindly on her, though he had never seen the place she sought. Then came the south wind, whose warm sigh carried the scent of flowers. But he too could not point the way. The east wind, his breath fresh as a new dawn, thought long but shook his head. It was the north wind, last of the four, who finally lifted her doubt. His chill was old as forgotten winters, and he knew the place she named. "Climb onto my back," he said, "and I will carry you there." Their flight was a rush of wind and hours, out over oceans sleeping beneath morning fog, across mountains still touched with the last of the night stars. Together they travelled far, to where the sun sank low and the moon rode high. And there, beyond the reach of either, stood the palace east of the sun and west of the moon. Its towers shone like polished ivory, softened by the pale blues of coming twilight. In that far place, her beloved was held fast, promised to a future not his own. With the gifts she had gathered, those small shining tokens of hope, she quietly worked to win him back, trading each in turn for a little time in his company. First the apple, then the comb, then the spinning wheel. By the light of 100 lanterns that threw soft shadows on the castle walls, she reached him at last. Beneath the high, vaulted ceilings, in a silence where unspoken things flickered like sparks off a hearth, the truth passed between them, not in words, but as a warmth felt on both sides, like the promise of spring found deep in the cold of winter. And so, with a shared and steady understanding, they loosed the spell that neither had chosen. They turned their backs on the castle where the long shadows had gathered, and walked out together, hand in hand, into the gentle falling dusk. The north wind, resting on his ice seat above the world, felt the weight of their gladness and lent them his favour one last time. Lifted on a rising gale, they came back to green and remembered country, to valleys where the rivers ran singing, and to homes where hearth fires glowed in welcome. Once more, the youngest daughter stood at her family's door, in its warmth and welcoming light, her long journey behind her, and beside her stood her prince, no longer hidden inside a bear's enchanted shape, sure as the seasons turn from the frost to bloom. Their years unfolded in quiet happiness, their contentment as easy as a tune carried on a soft wind, and as the peace of night folded over them like a warm blanket, sleep brought with it the certainty that though sun and moon still traced their long arcs across the far sky, there was no more need to chase such distant lights, for home had been closer all along than she had ever dreamed. In the soft light of that twilight, the young woman and her prince walked hand in hand, their steps brushing through the tender grass, cool now with the coming of evening. Each footfall seemed to send a quiet ripple through the earth, like the echo of a lullaby known only to those long parted and at last reunited. As they neared the valley, the familiar shape of her childhood land opened around them. The gentle rises that once cradled her dreams now seemed to cradle the future they would share. The old farmhouse came into view, warm with candlelight against the windows, the air sweet with wildflowers and freshly cut hay. The warmth of home closed around them as they stepped inside, met by the glad arms of her family. Her brothers and sisters laughed together, and her parents, their faces lined with the years, smiled with the same love and relief. Gathered at a table laid with simple plenty, they spoke of journeys, those already taken and those still to come, trading stories and hopes late into the evening. Outside, the night sky hung dark and deep, its stars like faraway echoes of dreams come true. The great white bear no longer needed to cloak love in enchantment, stayed only as a tender memory in her heart. His part in the story played and done. Now only the quiet constancy of the prince remained at her side, living each day with grateful hearts. The two found joy in the turning of the seasons. They built their life on the same solid ground where her story had begun. Each sunrise a new page in the world they were making. The farm flourished, colour and scent rising from soil tended with care, and they were glad that the riches once promised by a bear's bargain had come to them through love rather than gold. When winter wrapped the land in its silent cold, their home was a beacon of warmth and cheer. Songs and laughter moved through the rooms, lit by fires crackling in stone hearths. Then spring came gently back, coaxing life into field and forest, and they watched the world wake again, the peace of their own hearts answered in the waking of the earth. The youngest daughter, grown into a patient storyteller, would often sit beneath the old oak and share the tale of her journey with those who gathered to listen. She spoke of courage and of the winds that guide the lost, of gifts received with open hands, and the quiet magic to be found in ordinary days. And as the sun slipped below the hills, and the moon rose to cast its soft light, the story would end, as it always did, with the reminder that true magic lay not in far-off castles, nor in any weave of enchantment, but in the steady constancy of a life built with love, closer than dreams, rooted deep beneath the sheltering sky. And so, their hearts easy and unburdened at last, they drifted into peaceful sleep, held safe by all they held dear. And now, let yourself settle in a little deeper as we begin our next tale. Once upon a time, in the soft heart of a Norwegian winter, beneath the great shoulders of the Dovrefjell mountains, there lived stories carried in the snow itself, hushed along on the cold air, folded into the long white curves of the land. One such story, told by crackling fires and the low glow of lamplight, tells of a traveller and the remarkable companion who walked at his side, a gentle, dignified creature with fur as pure as new fallen snow. Our tale begins one still winter's eve, when the first stars had only just pricked the sky above the Dovrefjell. A traveller, bundled against the northern cold in thick wool and fur, his breath steaming into the mist that rose from the path, made his slow and steady way through the drifts. Beside him padded his travelling partner, a great white bear, quiet as the moonlit woods around them. The two were seeking shelter for the night, a place with a warm fire, kind company, and the good smell of pinewood smoke curling up through an old chimney. As the traveller looked up at the mountains, dark and serene against the glimmering sky, he caught sight of a small light in the frost-rimmed window of a farmhouse tucked snugly at the mountain's base. The farmhouse looked as though it had stood there always, its timbers long since settled into the land. Its snow-heavy roof sat over it like a woolen shawl, and warm golden light spilled from the windows onto the ground below. As he drew near, the traveller could smell burning peat mingling with the clean bite of the mountain air. Hopeful, he climbed the wooden steps to the door, the boards creaking softly beneath the muffled hush of the snow. Gently, he knocked. After a moment, the door swung open, releasing a gust of warm air and a flood of amber light. There stood the farmer, rough hands, weathered face. His expression caught somewhere between welcome and surprise, especially at the sight of the enormous white bear standing calmly at the traveller's side. "Good evening to you," the traveller greeted him, snowflakes melting on his cheeks. "I am only a weary wanderer in need of shelter. Might you have room for me and my bear to rest our bones by your hearth?" The farmer rubbed his chin a moment, uncertain, then beckoned them inside, where the air was rich with cooking stew, herbs, and the faint sweetness of warm bread. "You are most welcome," he said, as his wife came from the kitchen, her eyes widening at the bear though her smile held. "But I must warn you," he went on. "Each year, on Christmas Eve, a troop of unruly trolls comes down out of the mountains. They make a frightful mess of the place, and no honest folk like us have ever managed to keep them away." The traveller's brow furrowed. "Trolls, you say?" he murmured, easing into a wooden chair near the hearth, where the warmth began to thaw his fingers and toes. The bear settled by the fire with a soft huff, his broad white form almost lion-like at rest. "Aye, trolls." The farmer nodded, glancing toward the dark night beyond the walls. "Every Christmas Eve, they come with their mischief and their racket. It has become a sort of tradition, one we would gladly do without." The traveller's eyes twinkled, and he leaned back. "Well," he said with a small grin, looking to his furry friend, "perhaps this year things will go a little differently. My bear here is gentle enough for all his size, though I dare say he wouldn't take kindly to being pestered." The farmer chuckled, feeling the first flicker of hope for a quieter Christmas Eve. His wife served them deep bowls of stew that filled their bellies and warmed them through. As the evening lengthened, the wind sang softly against the windows, and inside, the warmth wrapped around them like an old familiar quilt. Late in the night, when the fire had burned low and the lamps were dim, the quiet broke. From the edge of the forest came the unmistakable sounds of mischief. Faint giggles, an odd clatter carried on the breeze, drawing nearer with every minute. The family huddled close and listened. Then, just as the farmer had warned, the door creaked open without invitation, and in shuffled the trolls, wide grinning, gleam-eyed, awkward on their feet. They were an odd bunch in the dim light, dressed in patchwork colours, whatever they'd salvaged most likely. Some in old knitted caps, others in scarves nearly swallowing their round, rumpled faces, each nose red with cold. Every one of them was merry, with the promise of a good prank. The first troll stopped short. His eye had caught the great white shape curled by the fire, and the room was quiet, but for the soft settling of the coals. "Look here," he called to the others, more delighted than afraid. "What a huge cat they've got this year." He pointed, and the rest crowded round, each of them eager for a look at what they took to be the grandest cat they'd ever seen. One bold troll, egged on by his fellows, decided to tease the overgrown creature. He plucked an apple from the table and tossed it, so it bounced softly off the bear's side. The bear opened one eye, regarding the little troll with no malice at all, only a mild, sleepy curiosity, and then yawned, wide and slow, his teeth catching the firelight. That was enough. The sight of such a yawn emptied every thought of fun from the troll's head. His laughter stuttered and stopped, and he backed away, crying out to the others, "Best not linger here. A cat this size is bound to have an appetite to match." Sobered now, the trolls made for the door in a jostle of clumsy steps and hurried whispers, slipping one by one out into the dark beyond the threshold, their mischief quite forgotten. The bear let out a long sigh and settled back into sleep. And that sigh said more than any warning could. Away the trolls went, back to their haunts in the mountains, and never again did they trouble the quiet farmhouse on the Dovrefjell slope. The farmer, his wife, the traveller, and even the bear took in the sudden calm, this new peace settling over the house like a warm and familiar embrace. As the night drifted on toward morning, they found themselves wrapped in a comfort deeper than the fire's warmth, the still quiet of a home newly freed of a long trouble. And so it went that every Christmas Eve after, the trolls stayed away. Perhaps they muttered among themselves about the great white cat at the farmhouse. Perhaps they simply carried their pranks somewhere far from Dovrefjell, content to leave that house in peace. The farmhouse stood through many a snowy winter after that, its walls steeped in stories and laughter and the small comfortable sounds of good folk, where even the shadows kept their voices low. And so they say that if you cross the Dovrefjell on a crisp winter's night, when the frost has painted the world white and the starlight lingers overhead, you may hear the story too, drifting from the chimneys, wandering out among the trees, a tale of a traveller and his bear, who once turned back mischief with a single sleepy look. Listen well, and in the hush of snow underfoot and the sigh of the wind, you may find yourself carried along by it, straight into the gentle dreams that wait beyond the glow of your own fire, beneath a sky where such stories are born and lived and told again through the quiet of Norwegian nights. As the night gave way to the first pale hints of dawn, a soft hush fell over the snow-covered land. The cold seemed to hold its breath, wrapping the little farmhouse close. Inside, the coals whispered in the hearth, sending out slow pulses of warmth like a quiet heartbeat through the dim room. The bear, still by the fire, sighed contentedly in his sleep, his fur lit gold at the edges by the glowing embers. The traveller woke first, stretching with the ease of one who has found unexpected comfort, gratitude settling into his bones with each breath of the warm, peaty air. Outside, The soft crunch of snow marked the start of a winter's day, and the first hardy birds began a cautious song against the faint whistle of wind through bare branches. The farmer and his wife, both early risers by habit, moved quietly about, their voices low, as if not to disturb the calm the night had left behind. The woman worked the dough for the morning's bread with practiced hands, while the farmer stoked the fire, each small motion a word in the unspoken language of a contented house. When all were awake at last, gathered in the warm kitchen amid the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee, the farmer looked at the traveller with a grateful smile. "Never have I known such peace on a Christmas morning," he admitted, his voice softened by the wonder of it. The traveller nodded, his eyes bright with the same gladness, while the bear only yawned, stretched luxuriously, and settled down for another nap. As breakfast went on, an easy fellowship grew among them, carried through shared stories and quiet laughter. The room came alive with talk that wove old tales together, with the newness of friendship forged on a single remarkable night. Outside, the Dovrefjell stood still and white, the morning light laying gentle shadows across its broad and stoic face. The horizon was a band of soft, fading colour, and fresh snow began to drift down again in slow spirals, each flake a small kindness of the winter. Anyone who paused to notice. Promises were made to meet again as friends, and when the traveller at last prepared to go on his way, the farmer's wife sent him off with a thick slice of warm bread wrapped in cloth, a token of hospitality and of the friendship begun that night. The bear, rested and in good cheer, ambled at the traveller's side through snow that glistened beneath the rising sun, their footfalls a soft promise of more tales still to come. The farmhouse, its windows aglow in the pale morning light, slipped slowly from view behind the white-tipped trees. Inside, the warmth of that one night's adventure stayed on in every heart, a story to be told around many fires in the winters to come, and a gentle reminder that sometimes it takes only a moment of courage, or the calm presence of an unexpected friend, to send the shadows on their way and fill a home with a peace that outlasts any troublesome visitor. Release any tension you're holding and let the next story find you right where you are. There was once a gentle lad named Halvor, who came from a small village tucked among the green hills of Norway. He was known for his kind heart and his thoughtful nature, though many called him idle, for he was happiest watching the clouds drift by or listening to the leaves stir in the wind. In the long afternoons, he would lie in the meadow grass while the sun warmed the earth beneath him, dreaming of faraway places and of adventures at sea. One quiet afternoon, beneath a wide and open sky, Halvor watched a great ship glide into the sheltered bay below his village. Its sails swelled with the wind, and the low amber light lay soft across the harbour. Something in him stirred at the sight of it, a longing to see what lay beyond the familiar hills and woods he had always known. And so, much to the surprise of his family, Halvor decided to join the crew and follow the sea wherever it might carry him. Beneath a sky thick with stars, the ship cut its way across the swells. The sound of the water lapping against the wooden hull was a lullaby all its own, and the sea and sky seemed to blur into one dark expanse, broken only by the pale silver of the moon upon the waves. Days turned to nights, and nights back to days, and the boy from the village drifted ever farther from home, his mind full of the long, empty horizon. It was when the ship came upon a shoal wrapped in mist that Halvor's path turned once more. In the still gloaming, the vessel slowed, held by a hush that seemed to lie over the whole face of the water. Feeling a pull he could not name, Halvor asked to go ashore, and a small rowboat set him gently upon the strand, while the other sailors watched him go with curiosity and quiet wonder. As Halvor stepped onto this strange new land, the boards of the little quay gave way to soft sand beneath his feet. Here, the world felt touched with something old and kind. The air faintly humming, the pines carrying a scent of times both remembered and long forgotten. He paused in the cool shade of the ancient trees, and a path seemed to open before him. Waiting quietly in the veiled light of the forest, drawn onward, Halvor walked deeper into the woods. Fallen leaves crunched pleasantly underfoot, and shafts of sunlight slanted down through the branches overhead. Birds called softly from the boughs, their songs threading through the calm of that sheltered place. At last, he came out from among the trees, and there, far off on the horizon, stood a castle. But this was no ordinary castle. This was Soria Moria, a place of such beauty that dreaming and waking seemed to meet within its walls. Its spires shone like sun on dewed grass, and the very stones seemed to hold a gentle light, calling Halvor onward with a promise of quiet marvels. With every step, the air grew softer, carrying a faint sweetness like the memory of spring. The path climbed gently, its stones smooth and sun-warmed beneath him, worn by long years. The nearer he drew, it seemed he walked inside a waking dream, one that spoke to something deep in him with a soft and steadying clarity. At the gates of Soria Moria, Halvor found a garden where the colours ran richer than any he had ever seen. Bees hummed low among the blossoms, and small wings fluttered from flower to flower. The whole garden alive and stirring around him, as though each leaf were tended by an unseen hand. Within the castle walls, 3 gentle princesses came to greet him. Held there, they told him, under a long spell laid by the trolls of that country. The last light of evening fell across the marble floors and the tall, arched windows, and their eyes were calm and deep, though full of a quiet longing to be free. With courage and kindness for company, Halvor set himself to the gentle, patient task of loosening that old enchantment. The princesses shared with him what strength they had kept hidden, and told him where the troll's hold lay heaviest. Drawing on that strength, Halvor faced the guardians at the gates, and the long spell that had bound the castle began at last to give way. There was little struggle in the end, only a slow settling of silence where the troll's power had been. One by one, the princesses were freed, and their laughter rose like a peal of far-off bells, each note a small light in the gathering dusk. Months passed in an easy rhythm of shared stories and laughter beneath the castle's quiet eaves, its golden walls warm with tales of lands near and far. In time, Halvor and the youngest of the 3 princesses grew dear to one another, and it was understood between them that they would wed. And yet, deep within that dreamlike life, Halvor began to feel the pull of home, a soft tug that carried to him the cool wind over familiar hills and the murmur of the sea at evening. He wished only to look upon his parents once more and to tell them all that had befallen him before he settled at Soria Moria for good. And so Halvor called upon a gift the princesses had granted him and wished himself back to his parents' cottage, where smoke curled from the hearth and the air was warm with the comfort of sheep's wool and burning peat. The old cottage stood as it always had, a small refuge set against the soft sweep of hill and sky. Halvor stepped into the flickering warmth of the hearth, and his parents wept for gladness to see him whole and grown. For a while his heart was full, and yet, even so, it kept turning toward that other place, and toward the gentle princess who waited for him there. The days in the village passed in their quiet, familiar round, one gentle chore and small joy following another. But Soria Moria called to him still, faint as the last notes of birdsong carried off on the wind. And at last Halvor knew the time had come to return to his bride. Yet when he set out to find the way, the paths would not open as before. They wound only among the hills he had always known, and the shining towers were nowhere among them. Soria Moria, it seemed, lay somewhere no ordinary road could reach, east of the sun perhaps, and west of the moon. So Halvor did as the wise had always done in such straits. He set off to ask the winds where the castle lay, for the winds wander over all the world, and there is little they have not touched. He walked to the edges of the known country, to the high, lonely places where the air is always moving, and there he called out his question into the turning breeze. The east wind heard him first, fresh and cool as a new morning. It had blown across many a far shore, yet it had never once passed the towers of Soria Moria, and it could not say where they stood. "Go and ask my brother the west wind," it murmured kindly, and carried Halvor gently along on his way. The west wind, softer and warm with the scent of distant meadows, listened long, but it too shook its head. "I have combed 1,000 valleys," it sighed, "but never that castle. Ask the south wind. He ranges farther than I." And it set Halvor down at the south wind's door. The south wind, drowsy and slow, breathing of sun-warmed gardens, thought hard and searched its memory. But the golden spires were not among the places it had known. "There is one older and colder than any of us," it said. "Go to the north wind. If the castle can be found, he will have found it." At last Halvor came to the north wind, ancient and vast, its voice the low roar of forgotten winters. When Halvor asked his question, the great wind was still a long moment, and then it answered, gentle for all its strength. "Yes," it said. "Once, long ago, I blew an aspen leaf all the way to the walls of Soria Moria. I was so weary after that I could not stir for days. But I know the road. Climb onto my back, and I will carry you there." So Halvor climbed onto the broad, cold shoulders of the north wind, and together they rose into the night. They swept out over sleeping oceans, wrapped in fog, over mountains crowned with the last pale stars, on and on through the dark and the hours, until the wind, slower now and tender, set him down softly before the very gates he had longed for. And there, glowing against the coming dawn, stood Soria Moria at last, its towers shining as they had in his dreams. Within, he found the youngest princess waiting, her face lifting with a joy too deep for words as she saw him come through the gate. She had kept her heart for him through all the long months of his wandering, and now the waiting was ended. They came together in the quiet of that golden hall, and it was as though no distance had ever lain between them. And so, beneath the wide and gentle sky, Halvor and his princess were wed, there in the castle he had freed. Her sisters laughed and sang, and the old halls filled with a warm and easy gladness. Lamplight glowing soft along the marble, and the tall arched windows. The troll's long shadow was gone for good, and only kindness remained. When night drew its silver hush across the fields and forests, the streams and the far mountains, Halvor and his bride sat close by the fire, their hearts at rest at last. His wandering was over. The home he had crossed the world to find was his to keep. And there, beneath the slow sweep of the stars, wrapped in warmth and quiet, and the nearness of the one he loved, Halvor closed his eyes, and the long, tender tale of Soria Moria settled softly into sleep, gentle as the last of the evening light upon the calm water of a hidden fjord. Good night. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I hope these stories helped you drift somewhere soft and quiet. Good night.